The deadbolt slid home with a sound like a bone snapping, and in the empty basement kitchen of Rothbury Hill, it seemed to echo for a very long time. Selena Kovac didn't move. She stood at the industrial sink with her hands under the cold tap, a loose tooth aching in her jaw, scrubbing a copper skillet that was already spotless round and round, harder and harder, because the pan wasn't what she was trying to get clean. She was 27 years old and she mopped floors for a living. That's all she was in that house. She emptied wastebaskets, she carried out the trash after midnight, and every Friday she collected an envelope of cash that never once stayed in her own pocket. She'd learned the only rule that mattered under that roof on her very first day. Keep your head down, clean the baseboards, don't ever look the soldiers in the eye. So when the heavy door swung open behind her at 3 a.m, she did what she always did. She turned her face away, and she apologized. Declan Halloran stood in the doorway, 37 years old, third-generation Irish out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, the man who owned a harbor commissioner, 2 city councilmen, and a retired district attorney who still took his calls at midnight. He wasn't a big man. That's the thing people always got wrong about him. He was lean and sharp and quiet, carved down by 20 years of pressure into something that moved through a room the way a blade moves through water. He was holding a crystal glass with a finger of whiskey left in the bottom. He'd come down for ice, or for the quiet. He hadn't come down to find a crying girl at his sink, and in 2 full years, he'd never once set foot in the staff quarters. Not for anything. Not until tonight. Selena stopped breathing. She kept her chin tucked into her chest and turned the left side of her jaw into the shadows, and she said the words she'd been rehearsing since midnight. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be out of your way." Declan didn't answer. He stepped fully into the kitchen instead, reached behind himself, and pushed the heavy door shut. Then he turned the deadbolt. Nobody locks the kitchen doors. There's no reason to. He crossed the tile floor without hurrying, shut off the tap with 2 fingers, and told her to look at him. She wouldn't, so he lifted her chin carefully, the way you'd handle something already broken, and tilted her face up into the hard fluorescent light. He looked at the swelling under her eye. He looked at the split in her lip. He looked at the torn collar of her uniform, and at the dark finger-shaped bruises coming up along her throat. For 10 full seconds, Declan Halloran said absolutely nothing. He didn't gasp. He didn't frown. His face stayed perfectly, terrifyingly blank, but the temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees. Then he asked her 4 words, very softly, in a voice that carried the weight of a falling anvil. "Who did this to you?" She lied. Of course she lied, because in her world, a girl who talks ends up in the river. But Declan Halloran had never once in his life been a man you could lie to twice, and what he did over the next 6 hours would tear that house down to its foundations. If this pulled you in, do us a favor and hit that like button right now. Share it with somebody who loves a story with teeth, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Now, let's go back to that basement kitchen, 3:12 in the morning, and find out exactly what Declan Halloran did next. She lied the way someone lies, after rehearsing the words in her head for 3 straight hours. "The service stairs," she said, her voice hoarse and thin as paper. "The 4th step has had a broken corner since last summer. Everyone in the house knows that. I was carrying a stack of bed linens, and I couldn't see where I was going. I slipped and fell. And I'm sorry for disturbing you at this hour." She said all of it with her eyes fixed on the 2nd button of his white shirt, because she didn't have the courage to look him in the eye. Declan didn't answer at once. He released her chin, stepped back exactly once, then reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a metal lighter so old that the plating had worn completely away at the corners. He lit a cigarette. The flame flared for an instant, illuminating the hard lines of his face before vanishing. He drew in a breath, blew the smoke toward the ventilation fan, and when he spoke, his voice was just as calm as it had been when he asked her the first question. "You fell down the stairs." He paused just long enough for her to hope, and then the stairs grew 5 fingers and wrapped them around your throat. Selena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He wasn't mocking her. That was what made it terrifying. He spoke in the same tone a man might use to read a number from an inventory sheet, as though he were pointing out an arithmetic error in a ledger, instead of tearing her lie cleanly in half in the middle of the kitchen. She opened her mouth to say something else, anything at all, but no words would come. Declan tapped his cigarette lightly against the rim of the glass ashtray on the kitchen island. "A stack of bed linens," he said, "at 3 o'clock in the morning. Where were you taking clean linens at that hour?" Selena swallowed hard. She realized at once that she had built the lie while her mind was no longer working, and now every seam was exposed beneath the fluorescent lights. She had said bed linens because they were the heaviest thing she could think of, not because the explanation made sense. No one changed bed sheets at 3 o'clock in the morning. Everyone in the house knew that. He knew it too. "I was mistaken," she stammered. "It wasn't linens, it was the trash. I was taking out the trash." Declan nodded slowly, as though she had just handed him a report he already knew was false. "The trash goes through the service entrance on the ground floor," he said. "No one carries trash up the stairs, Miss Kovac. Trash goes down. It doesn't go up." And Selina suddenly understood that he was doing this methodically, that he would let her keep talking until she had nowhere left to stand, and that he wasn't in any hurry at all. He had the entire night. She had nothing. She lifted a hand to clutch the left side of her ribs, a wholly instinctive gesture, then lowered it the moment she realized she had revealed one more thing. Declan saw it. Of course he saw it. He said nothing about it. He merely took another drag from his cigarette and asked her, in the quiet voice she would continue hearing inside her head for months afterward, "Do you think I'm a fool, Selina?" And at that moment, amid all the frightening things that had happened that night, what made her blood run cold was the name at the end. Her name. In the 2 years she had worked at Rothbury Hill, not once had any man upstairs called her by her name. The housekeeper called her Miss Kovac when wages were handed out. The guards called her girl, or hey, or nothing at all, because most of the time they spoke through her as though she were a pillar. That was the rule, and she had learned it on her first day, along with the rule about keeping her head bowed and scrubbing the baseboards clean. People didn't remember the name of the person who washed their floors. They didn't need to. The fact that the master of this entire house knew exactly who she was meant one of two things, and both made her want to be sick. Either he had been watching her for a long time, or someone had mentioned her name to him. "No, sir," she whispered. "I don't think that." "Then don't tell me something you don't believe yourself," he replied. Selina heard her own breathing begin to break apart. She felt the familiar sensation she had carried for 4 years rising in her chest. The feeling of someone standing on a rotten plank and knowing it was going to break. All she could think about was the bill lying in the drawer of her bedside table, the envelope with the bold red lettering in the upper right corner, and the 15th drawing closer like a truck bearing down on her along a highway. "Please," she said, and her voice broke on the second word. "Please don't. I don't want to cause trouble. I've never caused trouble. You can ask the housekeeper. I haven't missed a single day in 2 years. I don't speak to anyone. I don't ask questions. I do my work, and then I go back to my room. I need this job. You don't understand how badly I need it. If you fire me, I won't have anywhere to go. And it isn't just me. Someone is counting on that Friday envelope, and if I lose it, then..." She stopped abruptly. She had said too much. She was standing in the kitchen of a man feared by the entire city, and she had just thrown open the only door she had kept locked for 4 years. Declan Halloran didn't move. He stood there, the cigarette burning slowly between 2 fingers, watching her with the gaze of a man who had just heard a puzzle piece fall precisely into place. "Someone," he said. It wasn't a question. Selina closed her eyes. "My younger brother," she said. The words escaped her before she could hold them back, and the moment they fell onto the tiled floor, she knew she wouldn't be able to stop anymore. "His name is Benedict. Everyone calls him Benny. He's 16 years old. He has severe spastic cerebral palsy affecting all 4 limbs, and he lives at a long-term care facility called Meadowbrook in Milford, about 45 minutes from here when the traffic is light." Selina heard her voice racing ahead of her thoughts, the words spilling out in no particular order, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. "He's been there for 4 years. Since our parents died. They were driving north on Interstate 95, near Fairfield, at 8 o'clock at night. It was raining, and a truck lost its brakes in the middle lane. Both of them. At the same time, I got the call while I was working an evening shift at the teaching hospital." She stopped, gripping the edge of the sink to steady herself, then continued in a lower voice. "I was in my final year of nursing school at Sacred Heart. I had 7 months left before graduation. 7 months. I'd already paid that semester's tuition, but Benny needed a legal guardian, and I was all he had left, and they wouldn't allow a 23-year-old student who had just lost both her parents to stay in school while working and serving as the full-time guardian of a severely disabled child. So I had to choose. I chose him." She looked up at him for the first time that entire night, then immediately lowered her eyes again. "I don't regret it. I just want you to understand that I'm not someone who quits halfway through." Declan said nothing. He crushed his cigarette into the glass ashtray, twisting it once to make certain it was completely extinguished, then left his hand resting there. Meadowbrook charges $9,400 a month, Selena said. That's the rate for a shared room, nurses available around the clock, physical therapy 3 times a week, and transportation to a neurology appointment in New Haven every quarter. Insurance covers some of it, but only some, and I have to find a way to pay the rest every month. I make $5,200 here. I also work 3 nights a week at an industrial laundry outside Norwalk, from 11 o'clock at night until 4 o'clock in the morning on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Altogether, it's almost enough. Almost enough means I fall short every month, and what I owe just keeps piling up. She swallowed. This month, I'm 6 days late. He looked at her. He only looked, his face revealing nothing. There's a clause in the contract, she continued, her voice beginning to tremble. If a family falls behind for 2 consecutive billing periods, the facility has the right to terminate the placement and transfer the patient into the state system. The closest place with an available bed is in the far northwestern part of the state, near the Massachusetts border. 140 miles away. I checked. By bus, it takes 7 hours each way with 2 transfers, and I don't have a car. That means I'd get to see him once a month, if I were lucky. Selena heard her own voice break in the middle of the sentence, and she hated it. She hated the way the tears kept rising despite how tightly she clenched her teeth. She hated that she was standing there in a uniform torn at the collar, pouring the whole wretched story of her life onto a man she was supposed to pass in the hallway with her head bowed. She raised the back of her hand and wiped her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to tell you any of this. You shouldn't have to listen." Declan still didn't answer. He watched her for a long while, and in that silence, Selena suddenly realized that there was no pity on his face. He didn't frown. He didn't shake his head. His expression didn't soften in that familiar way people's faces always did when they heard her story. He listened as though she were reading him an itemized statement of expenses. Strangely, that was the only thing all night that allowed her to breathe. Then he asked a question. Only one. And it wasn't the question she had expected. "How does the boy communicate?" Selena blinked. She had prepared herself for questions about insurance, about why she hadn't sued the trucking company, about where all her money had gone. No one had ever asked her that. "With his eyes," she said. "He has a device, a screen mounted on the frame of his wheelchair, with sensors that track his eye movements. There's an alphabet keyboard on it. He looks at each letter and holds his gaze there for about 1.5 seconds, and then the device reads the words aloud." She drew in a breath. "It's very slow. Even a short sentence takes several minutes. People usually walk away before he finishes, or they guess what he's trying to say and answer for him, and he hates that. He can't speak, but he hears everything. He understands everything. His cognitive ability is above average. People see the wheelchair and start speaking loudly to him as though he were a 3-year-old child, and he has to sit there and endure it." She fell silent for a moment. "He reads. He loves history. Last month, he spent almost 5 minutes spelling out a question for me, and the question was why I always visited on Saturdays instead of Sundays. He notices. He notices everything." Declan Halloran stood motionless beside the kitchen island, one hand still resting beside the ashtray. He didn't say a word for long enough that the compressor of the industrial refrigerator in the corner came on and then went quiet again. At last, he drew his hand back, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It wasn't softer. It was colder, in a way that made the hair rise along the back of Selena's neck. "You said you weren't allowed to cause trouble," he said. "You've mentioned it 3 times. Selena stood perfectly still. "Now I want you to listen carefully," Declan said. "Trouble isn't something you brought into my house. Trouble was already here, and tonight, it ran into you. I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen next," Declan said. And he said it so calmly that Selena needed a moment to understand that he was placing a condition on the table. "You have 2 choices, and I want you to consider both of them before you open your mouth, because I'm only going to ask you once." He didn't come any closer. He remained where he was beside the stone kitchen island, both hands in his pants pockets, watching her with the gaze of a man waiting for a number. "Choice number 1, he said. "You give me the name. Right now, in this room. And this ends here. You can go back to washing that pan if you want. You can return to your room and sleep. You'll still receive your envelope on Friday, just as you do every week, and I'll never mention this to you again. You won't have to give a statement to anyone, confront anyone, or look anyone in the face. You give me the name, and you walk away from this." Selina opened her mouth, but he raised 2 fingers ever so slightly, and she fell silent. Choice number 2, Declan continued. You keep telling me you fell down the stairs. He tilted his head toward the ceiling, where a pipe ran along the concrete beam. Rothbury Hill has 41 cameras, he said. 11 of them cover the rear perimeter, including the trash area, the service entrance, and the stretch of brick wall running alongside the storage building. They record continuously and store 30 days of footage on the server in the security room in the eastern basement. The man on the night shift is a 24-year-old kid named Tobias, and he'll pull up anything I tell him to within 4 minutes. He let those words lie between them. I'll know what happened out there before dawn, Selina. With you or without you. I'll have that man's name in my hands before 6 o'clock, and that's as certain as the sun coming up. Selina felt a chill travel down her spine. Then why are you asking me? She whispered. Declan looked at her. Because there's a difference, he said. If I have to get it myself, then by 6 o'clock I'll have 2 things. I'll have the name, and I'll have proof that someone in my house stood 5 feet away from me and lied straight to my face, twice, about something that happened on my property. His voice didn't rise by even a single degree. I don't keep people like that, he said. So if I have to open that footage, then before dawn you'll be paid through the end of the month, and you'll be outside the gates. Not because of what happened to you, because you stood here and decided I was a fool. Selina raised a hand to her mouth. She could feel her knees slowly going numb, and there was only one image in her mind, so clear it was merciless. The brightly lit reception lobby at Meadowbrook and the woman behind the front desk, with her glasses hanging from a chain, the woman who had always smiled at her, the woman who would have to tell her, I'm very sorry, Miss Kovac. We've already sent 2 notices. She thought about the 7-hour bus ride. She thought about having to explain to Benny, 1 letter at a time, why. You don't understand, she said, her voice completely broken now. He said he would kill me. He said if I opened my mouth, he knew where I lived. He knew which floor my room was on, and he said he would come back this Friday. I believed him. You didn't see his face when he said it, but I did, and I believed him. Declan didn't blink. He will not, he said. Only 3 words. There was no promise attached to them, no reassurance, no hand resting on her shoulder. It was only a flat declaration, spoken by a man who hadn't needed to repeat himself in 20 years, and it was that very dryness that made Selina believe him. She stood there in the basement kitchen and felt every reason she had for remaining silent break apart beneath its own weight. She had been silent for 4 years. She had been silent when Benny's supplemental insurance was cut. She had been silent when the housekeeper deducted the cost of a broken vase she hadn't broken. She had been silent out there in the darkness when she realized no one was coming, and silence had never saved her. Her hands dropped limply to her sides. She heard water dripping from the faucet into the steel sink, steady and slow, counting down. She closed her eyes. Brannigan. The name fell onto the tiled floor and lay there. Selina opened her eyes. She didn't dare look at him. She stared down at her rubber-soled shoes, at the streak of dried soap that had clung to the toe since yesterday afternoon, and waited for something, a sound, a gesture, a burst of anger. Nothing came. Declan Halloran didn't move. He didn't ask her to repeat it. He didn't seem surprised. Absolutely nothing changed on his face, and that was what made the air in the room grow thick, because Selina suddenly understood that he didn't need her to confirm anything else. He already knew what that name meant. He knew how tall the man was, how much he weighed, where he worked, and which shift he stood, and behind those dark eyes he was calculating something with the quiet precision of a man adding a long column of numbers. Then he spoke very softly, almost to himself. Curtis. Selina nodded once. Only once. Declan walked over to the steel stool tucked beneath the kitchen island, pulled it out, and sat down. It was such a small gesture that Selina almost missed it, but when he rested both elbows on his thighs and looked up, she realized he had lowered himself beneath her. She was standing, he was sitting. For the first time that night, she was the one who had to look down. Tell me what happened, he said. I already did, she replied. You gave me a name, Declan said. That isn't the same as telling me what happened. He gestured toward the second stool beside him, but she didn't sit, and he didn't force her. Don't summarize it, he said. Don't make it neat so it's easier for me to hear. Tell me every detail in the exact order it happened, starting from the moment you stepped through the service door. Selina gripped the edge of the sink behind her. Her mouth was so dry that she had to swallow twice before any sound would come out. Around 11:15, she said. I collected the trash from the kitchen and the 2 sitting rooms on the ground floor. There were 3 bags. I took them out through the rear service door, the one that opens onto the concrete yard where the large dumpster is kept. She paused. The light above that door burned out last week. I reported it to the housekeeper on Tuesday. She said she would add it to the maintenance list. It's very dark out there. The only light comes from the floodlight in the parking lot, and that's almost 65 feet away with a dividing wall in between. She heard her own voice drifting out mechanically, one sentence at a time, as though someone else were speaking for her. I threw the first 2 bags into the dumpster. When I turned around to get the third, he was already standing there. Selina felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the cold steel. I didn't hear him come up behind me. I don't know how long he had been standing there. He smelled like alcohol, not beer, something stronger. "What did he say?" Declan asked. His voice didn't change at all. Selina closed her eyes. "He said I worked here because someone allowed me to," she said. "He said people like me needed to remember our place. Then he said..." She stopped. She opened her eyes and stared down at the tiled floor, and when she continued, her voice was so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator nearly swallowed it. "He said the boss didn't care about girls who scrubbed floors." Nothing in the kitchen moved. Selina was staring at the floor, so she couldn't see Declan's face, but she heard the faintest sound, the slow, controlled breath he released through his nose. When she dared to look up, he was still sitting in the same position, his elbows resting on his thighs and his hands clasped together. Only one muscle along his jaw tightened once. Just once. Then it was still. "Go on," he said. "I pushed him away," Selina said. She heard the defensiveness in her own voice, and she hated it. "I pushed him with both hands, as hard as I could. I knew I wasn't strong enough, but I pushed anyway." She swallowed. "That was when he hit me." She didn't say anything more about what came afterward. She didn't need to, and he didn't ask. She only said, in a few short words, that she had fallen, that for a while she couldn't breathe, and that by the time she managed to stand again, he was gone. Then she had crossed the concrete yard, entered through the service door, locked it behind her, gone downstairs, and stood at this sink. "I don't know how long I stood there," she said, "until you came down." Declan remained still for a long while. Then he rose from the stool, and Selina tensed instinctively, but he didn't move toward her. He walked around the kitchen island to the linen cabinet beside the dishwasher, took out a neatly folded white cotton washcloth, and carried it to the second sink. He turned on the hot water. He held his hand beneath the stream for a moment, waiting for the temperature to rise, then soaked the cloth and carefully wrung it out with both hands, never once rushing. Selina watched him and couldn't understand what she was seeing. This man had just listened to her tell him something she had never told anyone, and his first response was to find a clean cloth. He turned back and stopped one step away from her. "Look up," he said. She raised her head. He lifted the warm cloth and pressed it very gently against the corner of her mouth, using only enough pressure to hold it there. Selina flinched from the heat, not the pain. For the past 4 hours, she had kept her hands submerged in freezing water, and that sudden warmth made her eyes sting in a way that neither panic nor fear had managed to do. "Take it," he said, placing the cloth in her hand. "Hold it there. Don't press too hard." He stepped back exactly once, restoring the distance between them, then looked at his wristwatch. 3:52, he said, as though recording a time in a ledger. Then he walked toward the heavy wooden door. "Where are you going?" Selina asked, immediately regretting the question. Declan stopped at the threshold with one hand on the handle. He didn't turn around. "I need to speak with Curtis," he said. "Please don't," she said. "Please don't do anything." "Lock the door behind me," Declan said. "Don't go outside. Don't clean anything. Don't open this door for anyone except me, even if it's someone you recognize, even if it's the housekeeper. Sit on that stool and keep that cloth against your lip until I return." He pulled the door open, and the dim yellow light from the corridor spilled inside, cutting a long streak across the tiled floor. "How long?" she asked. "Not long," he replied. Then the door closed behind him. Selina stood staring at the closed door for about 3 seconds before her body finally obeyed her. Then she rushed forward, her still wet hands slipping over the cold brass, and turned the bolt. The lock slid into place with a clean, heavy sound, and at that very moment she realized something so absurd it was almost cruel. She had just locked herself inside the very room where, half an hour earlier, she had thought she was going to die. She backed away until the edge of the kitchen island pressed against her spine. She was still holding the cloth. Its warmth had already begun to fade. She sat on the steel stool he had pulled out, drew both knees against her chest, and began to wait. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong. That was the first thing she noticed, and the more attention she paid to it, the more unmistakable it became. Rothbury Hill was never truly quiet. Even at 4 o'clock in the morning, there was always some sound overhead. The thud of shoe soles against the hardwood floor in the main corridor, the wheels of an office chair rolling in the security room, water rushing through the pipes when someone on the 3rd floor flushed a toilet, someone giving a short, abrupt laugh that died just as quickly. There were always more than a dozen men awake inside this house. Now there was nothing. Not a single sound came from beyond the ceiling. Selina raised her head and stared at the concrete beams running overhead, at the pipes wrapped in silver insulation, and at the rectangular air vent covered by iron slats. Then she realized that this silence wasn't an absence of anything. It had texture. It was dense. It was the silence of a house holding its breath. She began counting to keep her mind from drifting away. The industrial refrigerator in the corner ran in cycles. The compressor came on with a low hum that sent a faint vibration beneath the soles of her feet, continued for about 45 seconds, then abruptly shut off. After that came a longer silence, nearly 2 minutes by her count, before it started again. She counted 6 cycles, then 7. Then she lost track, because her mind had begun doing the thing she feared most. It had begun calculating. She had seen Curtis Brannigan in the staff kitchen often enough to know how tall he was. He had to be a whole head taller than Declan, perhaps 6 inches, and nearly half again as broad through the shoulders. He was the kind of man who had to angle his body to pass through a basement doorway. Declan, on the other hand, was lean. That was the first thing she thought of, irrationally and helplessly, that the man who had just walked through that door was thin, dressed in a white shirt, and carrying nothing in his hands except a glass of liquor that he had already set down. And Brannigan had a gun. They all had guns. Selina had seen the leather holsters beneath their suit jackets hundreds of times when they sat sprawled around the staff dining table, and she had learned not to look at them, just as she had learned not to look into their eyes. She sat on the stool and allowed that thought to run all the way to its end. What if Brannigan won? What if the next man who came down those stairs wasn't Declan Halloran? What if someone knocked on the door, and she opened it, and the man standing there was the one who had told her he would return on Friday? She had given Declan his name. She had done the very thing 4 years of survival had taught her never to do. Selina turned her head toward the wall behind the sink. Mounted there on a long steel magnetic strip was the chef's set of knives, 8 of them arranged from smallest to largest, their blades gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. She stared at them for a long while, then she looked away. She didn't get up. She didn't reach for any of them, because as she sat there, she had understood something with perfect clarity. If that door was broken down, and the man who entered was Brannigan, a kitchen knife wouldn't change anything. It would only make what happened last longer, and she would rather not make it last. The calmness of that thought frightened her. She raised the cloth, now gone cold, to her lips, then lowered it again. The faucet over the second sink hadn't been turned off completely. Water dripped into the steel basin at steady intervals, about 3 seconds apart, and in that silence, every drop sounded as loud as a nail being driven down. She let it drip. She didn't get up to tighten the faucet because she didn't want to stand. Time inside the basement began to warp. She didn't know how long she had been waiting. Perhaps 15 minutes, perhaps an hour. The digital clock on the oven control panel had been broken since before she started working there, and it still displayed the same old numbers, unblinking and useless. Then it came. A heavy thud sounded above the ceiling. Only one. It didn't sound like a footstep. It didn't sound like something falling. It was a deep sound with weight behind it, the kind of noise a large sack of goods made when it was dropped onto a hardwood floor from waist height. It traveled through the concrete, and Selina felt it in both feet before her ears had time to hear it. A fine layer of dust loosened from the iron slats of the air vent and drifted downward, turning slowly through the fluorescent light, taking a long time to reach the surface of the kitchen island. Selina didn't move. She sat there with both hands clenched tightly around the wet cloth and waited for a second sound. It never came. There was no shouting, no furniture crashing over, no footsteps running through the corridor upstairs, no doors slamming, none of the sounds a struggle should have made. There was only silence returning, and it came back so quickly that she shuddered, closing at once over that single noise the way water closed over a stone that had just sunk beneath its surface. The refrigerator in the corner began another cycle. Another drop of water fell from the faucet, Selena Kovac sat motionless on the steel stool in the middle of the basement kitchen, her eyes fixed on the locked wooden door, and began counting again from the beginning. She heard them before she had time to brace herself. The soles of leather shoes striking the concrete steps of the service staircase, neither fast nor slow, each footfall spaced with perfect precision. Tap, tap, tap. Selena slid off the stool and straightened, and in that moment she realized she was trying to hear the weight behind each step, trying to tell whether they belonged to a man who weighed 200 pounds or to someone lean. She couldn't tell. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A silence followed, so long that she could hear the blood pulsing in her ears. Then came a knock. Only one, delivered with a knuckle, crisp and dry. Selena. It was his voice. So normal it was absurd, neither breathless nor strained, with nothing in it that sounded any different from the voice he had used when he told her to keep the cloth against her lip. Her legs weakened, and she had to grip the edge of the kitchen island to make it the 3 steps to the door. She turned the bolt. The metal slid free of its socket. She pulled the heavy door inward. Declan Halloran stood in the dark corridor, and for the first half-second, all Selena saw was that he was still intact, that he was standing upright, that there was nothing on his face. Then her eyes moved downward. His tie was gone. The cuffs of his white shirt were still fastened, but the knuckles of his right hand were deeply scraped, the skin torn across 3 joints and already beginning to swell. On the cuff of that same arm, a dark red stain spread outward from the edge of the fabric, soaking into the white cotton the way only a liquid that was still warm could soak through. The stain was far too large to have come from a few torn knuckles. Selena understood that immediately, without anyone having to explain it, with the kind of understanding that came from 3.5 years of nursing school and 4 years of staring at hospital bills. It wasn't his blood. She stepped back. "Lock it," Declan said, walking past her into the kitchen. She obeyed. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took her 2 attempts to slide the bolt into place. When she turned around, he was already standing at the industrial sink, her sink, turning the hot water on full. He removed the cuff link from his right wrist and placed it on the steel counter, then rolled his sleeve above his elbow in 2 neat folds. He did the same to the other sleeve, even though there was nothing on the left one. He pressed the lever of the industrial soap dispenser 3 times. Then he began to wash. Selena stood with her back against the door and watched him. And it was the way he did it that chilled her, not the red stain on his cuff. He didn't hurriedly splash water over his hands. He didn't scrub them hard. He rubbed his palms together in circles, then laced the fingers of one hand between those of the other, turned them over, cleaned beneath each nail with the tip of his thumb, moved up around his wrists, then returned to the beginning and started again. He followed a sequence. It was the way people were taught in hospitals. It was the way a surgeon washed before entering an operating room, and no one learned that sequence by accident. A person learned it only by repeating it countless times. Water streamed into the steel basin and spiraled around the drain, and for the first 30 seconds, it carried the faintest diluted shade of pink, so pale that anyone who wasn't watching closely might have mistaken it for a reflection from the lights. Then the color faded. Then the water ran clear. Declan shut off the faucet with his elbow. He pulled 2 paper towels from the roll mounted on the wall, dried each finger one at a time, crumpled the towels, and tossed them into the trash. Then he turned, rested one hip against the edge of the sink, folded his arms across his chest, and looked at her. "Brannigan won't be returning to work," he said. Selena opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at the trash can where the 2 paper towels had fallen. She looked at the red stain on his cuff, now darkened to the color of rust. "What did you do to him?" she asked. Her voice didn't sound like her own. Declan didn't answer. "What did you do to him?" she asked again, louder this time, and she heard the note of panic she couldn't control. "Is he dead?" Declan Halloran looked at her for a long moment. There was no irritation on his face, no evasiveness, no sign that he was considering what he should say. He simply didn't answer, in the same way a door didn't answer. "That's no longer your concern," he said. "But you. It's no longer your concern, Selena." He pushed himself away from the sink and stepped forward, and she went rigid instinctively, pressing her back against the wooden door. Declan stopped at once. He saw her reaction, and something very small moved through his jaw before disappearing. He didn't take another step. He kept nearly 3 feet of distance between them and pointed toward the freezer in the corner. "There's ice in the second drawer," he said. "Put some in a bag, wrap it in a towel, and hold it over your left eye. 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, then repeat. If you don't, That eye will be swollen shut by noon tomorrow, and you won't be able to see through it." Selina nodded because she didn't know what else to do. "I have to go to my office," he said. "I have several calls to make." At 6 o'clock in the morning, go to the second floor, to the last room on the right side of the hallway, the one with the frosted glass door. A man named Walter Price will be there. He'll be waiting for you." Selina blinked. "What for?" she asked. Declan had already reached the door. He turned the bolt himself, pulled the door open, and stepped 1 foot into the darkness of the corridor. Then he stopped and spoke without turning around. "Bring the notice from your drawer," he said. "The one with the red lettering in the corner." And the door closed behind him. She didn't sleep. She returned to her room close to 5 o'clock, applied ice exactly as he had instructed, because she couldn't think of any reason not to, and sat on the edge of the bed in her uniform with its torn collar until the sky beyond the narrow barred window began to turn gray. At 5:40, she changed into a clean uniform, buttoned the collar all the way to the top even though the stiff fabric rubbed against the tender place, tied her hair back tightly, and opened the drawer of her nightstand. The envelope lay there beneath her notebook, and a box of non-prescription pain relievers. Red lettering marked the upper right corner. Final notice. She picked it up, and her hand trembled so violently that the paper rustled in the silent room. At 5:55, she stood before the frosted glass door at the end of the second-floor hallway. She had passed that door at least 500 times over the course of 2 years, and not once had she known what was inside. She knocked. "Come in," a man's voice called. Selina pushed open the door. The room was smaller than she had imagined, and brighter than she had expected. 2 east-facing windows had already begun to catch the first light of morning, and the entire rear wall was lined with oak filing compartments. The man seated behind the desk appeared to be about 63, thin, with closely cropped silver hair. He wore a gray vest with even the bottom button fastened and a pair of slender framed glasses. On the desk were 2 monitors, a stack of hardbound ledgers, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. He was the only man in this house whom Selina had never seen wearing a shoulder holster. "Miss Kovach," he said, rising to his feet. That, too, had never happened before. No man at Rothbury Hill had ever stood when she entered a room. "Walter Price," he said. "Please, have a seat." Selina sat in the chair opposite him, her knees pressed tightly together, the envelope resting in her lap. Walter didn't look at her face. He kept his gaze on the edge of the wooden desk, less than 2 feet from her, and held it there through nearly the entire conversation. Selina understood that it wasn't contempt. It was the way a decent man avoided staring at the bruises on a woman's face. "Did you bring the paperwork?" he asked. She passed the envelope across the desk. Walter opened it, removed the letter, and glanced through his glasses at the amount printed on the final line. $41,280. He read aloud without the slightest emphasis. To Selina, it was the number that had kept her awake for 22 consecutive months, the number she had broken down into individual night shifts, in the laundry, into weeks, into months, and had never managed to reduce by more than a few $100s. To this man, it was merely a line that needed to be entered. Walter set the letter down and turned one of the 2 monitors halfway around so she could see it. "I'm going to explain exactly how this is structured," he said, "because you have the right to know what you're signing. First, the outstanding debt to Meadowbrook was paid by wire transfer at 5:10 this morning. The payment didn't come from anyone's personal account. It came from the Halloran Foundation for the Community, a charitable foundation registered under Section 501c3 of the Tax Code, established in 1994, with an independent audit conducted every year." He pressed a key, and another page appeared. "Second, and more importantly, we've established a special needs trust in the name of Benedict Kovach. Are you familiar with that kind of trust?" Selina shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. "I've heard of them," she said. "In school, but never." She stopped. "They're not for people like me." Walter continued looking at the edge of the desk. "They exist precisely for people like your brother," he said. "If someone gives money directly to a person with a disability, that person exceeds the asset limit and immediately loses Medicaid eligibility. In other words, we give them money and then take away their health coverage. A special needs trust is designed to avoid that exact trap. The assets are held in the name of the trust, not in the boy's name, so his medical benefits won't be affected. The trustee will pay the care facility directly, along with the cost of equipment, physical therapy, and replacement of his communication device when it stops working." He pressed another key. The initial principal is sufficient to cover 20 years of care at the current rate, adjusted for inflation. Selina heard a ringing in her ears. She stared at the monitor, but the numbers refused to remain still. "Who is the trustee?" she asked. "An independent trust company in Hartford," Walter replied. "It has no connection to the Halloran family. They're accountable to the court, not to me." Then he said the words Selina would remember for a very long time. "There's one more thing you need to understand, Miss Kovac. You aren't a beneficiary of this trust. You have no right to withdraw money from it. You can't borrow against it. You can't use it as collateral, and your name doesn't appear on it in any capacity. Your brother is the sole beneficiary." Selina raised her head. "But what if I—" She stopped and began again. "What if I quit? What if I leave this place?" Walter Price pushed his glasses higher on his nose. For the first time that morning, he looked up and met her eyes directly. "The trust will continue," he said. "There is no provision tying it to your employment here. There is no revocation clause. You could walk out of this house at noon today, and it would continue paying for the boy's care until he turns 36. He paused, then continued in a quieter voice. "He called me at 4:10 this morning. I was asleep. He gave me only one instruction about how this was to be designed. He said, 'Structure it so she can leave whenever she wants.'" Selina sat motionless. She heard the printer beside the desk come to life, and the sound of paper being pulled through its rollers, and she felt something inside her chest slowly beginning to lift, a weight she had carried for so long that she had forgotten it could ever be taken away. She didn't cry because she was happy. She didn't feel happy. She cried because 22 months had been lifted from her ribs all at once, and her body didn't know what to do with the empty space they left behind. She raised both hands to cover her face and wept in silence, her shoulders trembling in waves, while Walter Price quietly pushed the box of tissues across the desk toward her, turned the monitor back to its original position, and didn't say another word until she stopped. At 9 o'clock that morning, she sat on the edge of the bed in her staff room with her old phone resting on her lap, doing the same thing she had begun the moment she left Walter Price's office. She searched the news. She typed in the name of the street that ran behind Rothbury Hill. She typed in the name of the surrounding area. She typed the words that sickened her to enter. Body. Discovered. Greenwich. This morning. She opened the local news station's website, closed it, then opened it again. There was only one image in her mind, and it refused to leave. The dark red stain spreading across the cuff of a white shirt, and the way the water swirling around the drain had turned a thin shade of pink before running clear again. At nearly 4 o'clock in the morning, she had given one man the name of another, and she had lain awake listening to that heavy thud above the ceiling, and now she was waiting to read about the consequences of having opened her mouth. There was nothing. No body had been found in Greenwich. No body had been found in Coscob or Old Greenwich or anywhere along the creek. She searched through 3 news sites and found nothing except a traffic collision on Route 1 and a town council meeting about the school budget. She sat motionless for a while, then did what she should have done from the beginning. She typed 2 words. Curtis Brannigan. It appeared on the second line of results. It was a brief report from the local newspaper, published at 7:42 that morning, fewer than 200 words long. Selina read it 3 times in succession and still couldn't understand what she was seeing. The Greenwich Police Department had confirmed the arrest of a 41-year-old man at an address in the northern part of town at approximately 4:25 that morning. He was being held in connection with an assault that had occurred at a private residence during the night. The report stated that investigators had received 2 recordings from a private security camera system, delivered directly to the district attorney's office overnight by an anonymous source, and that the recordings were described as clear and complete in their timeline. She read that sentence again. 4:25 in the morning. That meant that while she was sitting in the staff room with ice pressed against her eye, somewhere inside this house, someone had been calling the police. By noon, everyone in the basement knew. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, the next report appeared online. The arraignment had taken place at Superior Court in Stamford, 3 counts of assault and 1 count of attempted sexual assault. The defendant had no private attorney and had been assigned a public defender. The prosecution opposed bail, citing the risk of flight and the danger he posed to the victim, and the court agreed. No bail at all. Selina set the phone down on the bed and stared at the wall in front of her for a very long time. No private attorney. She understood the meaning of those 3 words better than anyone else who had read that report. Rothbury Hill had an entire legal office. Men in suits came and went every week. There were names she had overheard while cleaning the corridors, and if anyone in that house was arrested, Someone would appear at the police station within the hour. The fact that Curtis Brannigan had been forced to stand before the court with a public defender meant an order had been given, and that order was that no one was to touch his case. In the span of a single night, he had been severed from everything that had once protected him. That afternoon, Selina was passing the third-floor study while pushing her supply cart when she noticed the double doors standing partly open. Declan sat behind the desk. He still hadn't slept, and he had changed into another shirt. "Come in," he said without looking up. Selina pushed the cart inside and stood beside the bookcase, unsure where to begin. "You didn't kill him," she said. Declan set down his pen. "No," he said. "Why?" She heard herself ask it and immediately realized how terrible the question sounded, but she still needed to know. Declan leaned back in his chair. "A body creates an investigation," he said. "An investigation opens files, and files last forever. No one can control where they lead. 3 months later, people start asking what he did for a living. Then they ask who paid him. Then they ask whose property he worked on." He gave the smallest shrug. "That's how fools do it." "And this way?" she asked. "This way creates a precedent," Declan said. "There are about 20 men working for me in the basement, and every one of them read that report this morning. They understand that if they lay a hand on a woman in my house, they won't disappear quietly. They'll be dragged into the light. Their names will be printed in the newspapers. Their families will read about them, and no one will come to save them." He picked up his pen again. "Curtis will be sentenced. For an offense like that in this state. Once he's released, he'll be required to register on Connecticut's sex offender registry. For the rest of his life, his address will remain in a public database that anyone can search. He won't be able to rent a decent home or find a decent job, and every time he moves, his neighbors will be notified." Declan looked at her. "I could have given him an ending that lasted 40 seconds, he said. "Instead, I gave him 30 years. Selina stood motionless in the middle of the room. She thought about the news report, the 2 recordings, and the fact that someone had driven through the night to deliver them to the district attorney's office. Then she looked down at his right hand, holding the pen. 3 knuckles were still swollen, and the torn skin had begun to scab over. She remembered the dark red stain on his cuff, something that had seeped into the fabric while it was still warm, something that had already been there long before the call at 4:10. She understood the order of what had happened that night. "You beat him first," she said softly. "Then you made the call." Declan Halloran didn't deny it. He lowered his eyes to the paper before him and continued writing. "Don't mistake me for a decent man, Miss Kovach," he said. "I'm only a man who knows how to calculate." She noticed the change on Thursday morning, 3 days later, at the bend in the second-floor hallway. 2 men stood beside the coffee machine, both dressed in dark suits, coiled earpieces running down beneath their collars, and they were talking about some kind of shipment at the harbor. For the past 2 years, Selina had walked past men like them every day, and she knew the routine exactly. She would press herself against the wall, lower her face, wait until there was a space wide enough, then slip through, and if they didn't move aside, she would simply stand there and wait. This time, both men stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The one standing closer took half a step back and pressed his spine against the wall. The other lifted his coffee cup and moved all the way to the left, opening a passage so wide that her entire supply cart could have rolled through without touching either of them. Neither man looked at her. It wasn't the contemptuous disregard she had grown accustomed to. It was deliberate avoidance, their eyes fixed on the hardwood floor, their chins slightly lowered, both of them holding that posture until she had gone the length of the hallway. Selina pushed her cart onward and felt their eyes touch her back, then immediately pull away when she turned her head. By noon, she understood that it hadn't been an accident. She went down to the staff kitchen at 12:15, the busiest part of the day, when at least 8 or 9 men were always seated around the long wooden table, eating and talking loudly. She stepped through the doorway, and the voices faded over the course of 3 seconds, not abruptly, but like a radio being slowly turned down. The man at the head of the table rose first and gathered his plate. Then 2 more men stood. Then the entire table. In less than a minute, 9 grown men had carried their unfinished meals out of the room without speaking a word, leaving Selina alone in the staff kitchen, with the long wooden table and the lingering warmth of their bodies still resting on the seats. She stood there for quite a while. Something rose inside her chest, a feeling so difficult to name that it would be a long time before she finally found the words for it. She was no longer invisible, but she hadn't become one of them either. She had become a loaded gun lying in the middle of the dining table. Everyone knew it was there. No one wanted to sit close to it. Dorothea Lindquist emerged from the pantry carrying a box of canned tomatoes in her arms, looked at the empty table, then looked at Selina. The head cook was 58 years old and Swedish, with silver hair tucked neatly beneath a hairnet and 2 large forearms reddened by 40 years of working over kitchen stoves. She was the first person in this house who had ever spoken kindly to Selina. On Selina's second day, when she had pushed a bowl of soup toward her and said every new girl arrived looking that thin, Thea set down the box of tomatoes. She walked to the warming oven, opened it, and removed a plate covered with foil, still hot, then placed it at the empty end of the table. After that, she laid a fork beside it. "Sit down," she said. "Eat while it's hot." Only 2 sentences. She didn't ask about what had happened that night. She didn't look at the bruise beneath Selina's eye, now fading into a sickly shade of yellow. She returned to her place by the sink and continued trimming vegetables, leaving Selina alone with the plate of hot food. Selina sat down and ate every bite, and as she ate, tears kept falling onto the plate, though she didn't understand why. That afternoon, she found Colleen Brady in the basement laundry room. Colleen was 24 years old and had been working there for only 5 months. She had red hair and came from a second-generation Irish family in Bridgeport, and she always talked too much and too quickly, in the way of someone who was trying to fill every silence because silence frightened her. Today, Colleen didn't say anything. She was folding towels at the long table, and when Selina entered, Colleen's hand stopped and she looked up. The expression on her face made Selina freeze in the doorway. There was fear in it, clear and impossible to conceal. But beneath the fear was something else, something like longing, like the way a person looked at someone who had just walked through a door while she herself was still standing outside. "Miss Kovach," Colleen said. Then she couldn't continue. Selina walked over, picked up a towel, and began folding beside her. They worked together in silence for about 5 minutes. Then Colleen asked very quietly, her eyes still fixed on the stack of towels, "Is it true that you spoke up?" Selina's hand stopped. "Yes," she answered. Colleen nodded. She folded 2 more towels before asking her next question, and her voice was so faint that it was almost swallowed by the sound of the dryers. "Did anything happen to you afterward?" Selina looked at the 24-year-old woman, at the way her shoulders curled forward, at the way her body remained slightly angled toward the door, and she realized that Colleen Brady wasn't asking out of curiosity. There was something Colleen was carrying inside herself too, and she was trying to calculate the price of opening her mouth. Selina set the towel down. "No," she said. "Nothing happened to me." Colleen released a very long breath. She didn't say anything else, and Selina didn't ask. That evening, as Selina pushed her supply cart along the 3rd-floor hallway, a man approaching from the opposite direction saw her from a distance, abruptly turned through a doorway on his right, and closed it behind him. She stood in the middle of the thickly carpeted corridor beneath the warm, golden light of the wall lamps, inside a house where 41 cameras were running, and no one dared come within 10 feet of her. She was safer than any other woman in the state of Connecticut. She had never been so alone. The library was in the west wing of the 2nd floor, and Selina cleaned it every Monday afternoon, always at 4 o'clock, always when the room was empty. That afternoon, it wasn't empty. The woman seated in the armchair beside the window appeared to be about 35, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, her dark brown hair gathered low at the nape of her neck, an open leather portfolio resting on her lap. Selina had seen her several times over the past 2 years, always only in passing, always on her way out to a waiting car. Fiona Halloran, Declan's younger sister, and the woman who managed the entire legitimate side of the family's affairs from a law office in Stamford. "Close the door for me," Fiona said. It wasn't an order or a threat, merely the ordinary request of someone busy. Selina closed the door and remained beside her supply cart, both hands resting on the handle. "Sit down," Fiona said, gesturing toward the chair opposite her. "I'd rather stand." "All right." Fiona closed the portfolio and placed it on the small table between them, turning it so Selina could read what was inside. "I won't waste your time," she said. "I'm not here to threaten you, and I don't believe you've done anything wrong. I read the report that morning, just as everyone else did. What happened to you was unacceptable, and I'm glad that bastard is sitting in the Bridgeport Detention Center." Selina said nothing. "There are 3 things in this folder," Fiona continued, lifting each section in turn. "The first is a standard confidentiality agreement. You agree not to disclose anything you've seen or heard inside this house. There's no financial penalty clause and no non-compete provision. It's only 2 pages long, and any attorney you show it to will tell you it's harmless. Second, she turned to the next section. This is a letter of acceptance from Sacred Heart University approving your return to the bachelor's degree program in nursing for the spring semester. I spoke with the registrar's office on Friday. Your previous credits are still valid. You only need to complete 2 semesters and 1 clinical practicum. Tuition, books, licensing, examination fees, everything. It isn't a loan, it's a scholarship, paid through my law firm's educational foundation. Selina looked down at the paper bearing the university's red and white logo and felt something pierce her chest. The last time she had seen that logo was 4 years ago, on the envelope containing the notice that her enrollment had been deferred. Third, Fiona said, this is the file for a facility called Willowmere in Amherst, Massachusetts. I had someone compare every category with Meadowbrook. Their nurse-to-patient ratio is slightly better. They have a speech therapist who specializes in eye-controlled communication devices, and that therapist works full-time rather than under an hourly contract. Will cover the cost of moving your brother and the entire difference in fees. Amherst is 2 hours from Sacred Heart, so you could visit him every weekend. She straightened in her chair. You finish that degree in 14 months. You find work at a respectable hospital, and you never have to set foot inside a house like this again. Selina stood motionless for a very long time. She looked at the 3 neat stacks of paper on the table and felt something she would never admit to anyone. For nearly 4 full seconds, she truly wanted to reach out and take them. Why? She asked. Fiona Halloran didn't evade the question. She removed her glasses, folded them, and placed them on the table. Because you're a security vulnerability with a heartbeat, she said. Selina blinked. I'm going to be direct, and I hope you won't take offense, Fiona said, her voice still perfectly courteous, with the cold precision of a surgeon's blade. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been watching my brother for 4 years. There's a task force in New Haven whose sole purpose is to find someone inside this house willing to talk. For 4 years, they haven't found anyone. Because everyone here either has money, carries guilt of their own, or has both. Then she looked directly into Selina's eyes. But you're different. You're the only person beneath this roof who hasn't committed a crime, hasn't profited from the business, and has a family member who depends entirely on you. That means you're the only person here with a reason to cooperate with them and something they can use as leverage. We all know it. Selina felt the blood drain from her face. I've never spoken to anyone, she said. I know, Fiona replied immediately. I believe you. That's precisely why I'm sitting here offering you a way out instead of something else. She pushed the portfolio forward by less than an inch. I don't want you trapped between 2 sides, Miss Kovach. Because when they come, and they will come, you'll have to choose between my brother and yours. I know which one you'll choose, and I don't blame you. I simply don't want you ever to have to face that choice. The room fell silent. Beyond the window, the November afternoon light was slowly retreating from the trees. Selina looked down at her hands, at the fingers cracked from cleaning chemicals, then raised her eyes to the woman in the suit, seated before her. No, she said quietly. Fiona tilted her head. I'm sorry? I won't accept it, Selina said. It wasn't a noble decision, and she knew that. Even much later, whenever she remembered that moment, she would never find a way to make it sound noble. She refused because she had listened very carefully, and amid everything Fiona Halloran had said, one detail didn't fit. If Selina truly was a security vulnerability, then the way to handle a vulnerability was to keep it where it could be watched. No one sent a vulnerability out of the house and paid for it to attend school 125 miles away. Not unless the purpose wasn't to close the vulnerability, but to remove her from this house. It's better for everyone if I stay here, Selina said, though even she didn't believe her own words. Fiona Halloran remained still for several seconds. Then she nodded, put her glasses back on, and closed the portfolio. But before she could regain control of her expression, Selina saw something flash across it, swift and unmistakable. And it wasn't the disappointment of an attorney whose offer had been rejected. It looked much more like fear. On Saturday morning, he passed her in the first-floor hallway without stopping or turning his head, and spoke exactly 1 sentence. The car will be waiting outside the gate at 2 o'clock. He was gone before she could ask where the car was going, and she stood there with a cleaning rag in her hand, understanding that it hadn't been an invitation. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, she went out to the gate wearing the only wool coat she owned. The car was an ordinary black sedan, and Declan was behind the wheel. Alone. with no driver and no one accompanying him. He said nothing for the first 40 minutes. Selina sat in the passenger seat, watching the highway slip past, and didn't dare ask why. When the sign for Milford appeared, her heart began to beat faster. When they reached the Meadowbrook parking lot, he turned off the engine and sat motionless. "You don't have to come inside," she said. "I know," he replied, then opened the car door. The woman at the reception desk, whose glasses hung from a chain around her neck, looked at Selina, then at the man in the black coat following behind her, and for a second, she didn't know how to respond. Then she pushed the visitor register toward them. Benny's room was at the end of the east hallway, with a window overlooking a lawn where 3 maple trees stood. The boy was seated in a wheelchair with a headrest, wearing the dark blue sweater Selina had bought for him the previous winter. In front of him was a screen mounted on an adjustable arm and tilted at approximately 30 degrees, displaying an alphabet keyboard with a small yellow cursor. "I'm here," Selina said. She moved around to the front so he could see her without having to turn his head. "I came." Benedict Kovac's eyes moved. That was the first thing Declan noticed, and he stopped at the threshold. The boy was 16 years old, with a thin face and both hands curled in his lap, and his eyes were moving across the screen with absolute concentration. A machine spoke in a flat, slightly metallic, synthetic voice. "You're later than usual." Selina gave a choked little laugh. "I know. I'm sorry. I brought someone with me." His eyes shifted toward the door and stopped there. Selina drew a breath. "This is Mr. Halloran," she said. "He owns the place where I work." For a long while, nothing happened. Then the yellow cursor began to move. This was what Selina had tried to explain to people for 4 years, and had never once managed to make them understand. It was slow. It was painfully slow. The boy's eyes had to remain fixed on a single letter for a full 1.5 seconds before the machine confirmed it. And between letters, he had to find his place again. If he grew tired or the muscles in his neck contracted, the cursor would slip, and he would have to begin again. The first word appeared after approximately 7 seconds. "My," then a pause, then "sister." Selina watched the screen and felt her throat tighten because she had already begun to understand what he was asking, and she had promised herself long ago that she would never speak for him. By the 4th word, 1.5 minutes had passed. Declan Halloran still stood at the threshold, motionless, his arms hanging at his sides. "Cry." Selina raised a hand to her mouth. The yellow cursor remained there for quite a while, then began moving again, more slowly now, and she saw the corner of the boy's eye twitch with exhaustion. 3 minutes. 3 minutes and 10 seconds. No one in the room spoke. A cart rolled past in the hallway. Someone laughed in the room next door. A clock ticked on the wall. The final word appeared at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Then the machine read the entire question aloud, flat and without inflection or emotion. "Did my sister cry?" Selina turned her face away. Declan Halloran stepped into the room. He walked to the front of the wheelchair, then did something Selina had never seen anyone do except the finest doctors. He knelt. One knee touched the floor, then the other, until his eyes were slightly below the boy's, and he remained in that position. "You were asking me, weren't you?" he said. "Not your sister." Benedict's eyes remained fixed on his face. "All right," Declan said. "Then I'll answer you." He didn't lower his voice. He didn't speak more slowly. He spoke to the boy in exactly the same tone he had used in the basement kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning. "Yes," he said. "Once. In my kitchen, on Tuesday." Selina stood beside the window, her fingers digging into the sill. "I didn't see what happened," Declan continued. "I came downstairs after it was over, and I found your sister standing at the sink. She was crying, and she was trying to keep me from seeing it." He paused. "I asked who had done it. She lied to me twice because she was afraid of losing her job, and she was afraid of losing her job because of you." The boy blinked once. "The man who did it was arrested at 4:25 the following morning," Declan said. "He's being held in Bridgeport without bail, and he won't be getting out for many years. It's been taken care of. You don't need to worry about it anymore." Then he spoke the final words. "But I won't lie to you about the question you just asked. Yes, your sister cried." The yellow cursor began moving again, but this time there were only 3 letters, and it took less than a minute. The machine spoke. "Thank you." Declan Halloran rose to his feet. He didn't pat the boy's shoulder, stroke his head, or say anything about how strong he was. He merely nodded once, the way one person might nod to another who had finished a difficult task. then stepped back and stood beside the window until visiting hours were over. It was dark on the drive home. They spent the first 20 minutes in silence, while the headlights swept across rows of bare trees lining the turnoff. Then Declan spoke, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "I was 17 when my father died." Selina turned toward him. "My family was large," he said. "Aunts, uncles, relatives, his people. For 3 days, approximately 200 people passed through that house. Every one of them shook my hand. Every one of them told me that I was the man of the house now, that my sister was depending on me, and that I had to be strong." He changed gears. "No one asked me if I cried," he said. "Not one person. Not in 20 years. And he just did." It was nearly 11 o'clock on Tuesday night the following week, and Selina was polishing the brass fireplace set in the great room when the double doors opened. It was a task she saved for the end of her shift because it didn't require her to think. She only had to kneel on the rug, rub in slow circles, and let her mind empty itself for 40 minutes. Declan walked in, removed his coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and went straight to the liquor cabinet at the far end of the room. He had just returned from somewhere, and his hair was still damp from the rain. Selina instinctively began gathering her things, because the rule was that she wasn't to linger whenever the master of the house entered a room. But he said, "There's no need." She sat down again. He poured a little of something into a glass but didn't drink it. He simply held it and leaned one hip against the edge of the cabinet. "They're still avoiding you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she answered. "Does it bother you?" Selina considered her answer. "It's quiet," she said. "I prefer the quiet to the way things were before." Declan nodded slowly. "They're avoiding you because they no longer understand the rules of the game," he said. "In 20 years inside this house, no one has ever walked away from something like that and remained standing here afterward. Now they look at you, and they don't see a girl who scrubs floors anymore. They see a tripwire." Selina's hand stopped on the brass fireplace fender. "Does that bother you?" she asked, surprising herself with the courage it took to say it. 3 weeks earlier, she would never have dared ask this man such a direct question. "If it bothered me, I wouldn't have done it," he replied. He set the glass down without taking a drink. "You still haven't asked me the question you've wanted to ask since the day you sat in Walter's office," he said. Selina placed the rag on the rug. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Not the Brannigan matter. The other thing. You didn't owe me anything. You could have given me 2 months' wages and told me to keep quiet, and I would have kept quiet. You know that. You paid $41,000 and created a trust that will last 20 years for a child you hadn't even met at the time." Declan Halloran didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the rug for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "I hate leverage," he said. Selina waited. "I work with leverage every day," he continued. "It's nearly the whole of what I do. You discover what someone is afraid to lose. Then you put your hand on it, and from that moment on, you don't need to threaten them anymore. They do the rest themselves. The man with a child in college. The man whose wife doesn't know. The man who owes money to a casino in Atlantic City. You don't need to raise a fist to any of them." He looked up. "That bill in your drawer was perfect leverage. It made you work 3 nights a week at the laundromat and still feel as though it wasn't enough. It made you afraid to call in sick. It made you keep your eyes lowered as you passed the men in these hallways for 2 years, telling yourself that was the price you had to pay. And that night, when you stood at the sink and decided you wouldn't tell anyone, it wasn't you making that decision. It was the bill." Selina felt her throat tighten. "Someone in my house understood that before I did," Declan said. "He looked at you and saw that exact leverage, and he knew you wouldn't dare speak. That's why he chose you instead of someone else." He paused. "So I took it away." "You could have taken it away another way," Selina said quietly. "You could have paid me. You could have put my name on that trust. You deliberately chose not to." "Yes," he said. "Why?" Declan Halloran straightened away from the edge of the cabinet. "Because if I'd put your name on it, I would have bought you," he said. "You would stay in this house because you'd be afraid of losing it. You would nod whenever I spoke. You would see things in these hallways and tell yourself you hadn't seen anything. And one day, you would wonder how that was any different from when the bill was still sitting in your drawer." He took one step toward her, then stopped. "I didn't remove that debt so I could buy you," he said. "I removed it so no one could ever buy you again. Not even me." The room fell silent. Beyond the tall windows, the November rain tapped softly against the glass. "What does that mean?" Selina asked. It means you're free, he replied. You don't owe me a cent. And you don't owe me your gratitude. That trust continues, whether you stay here or not. Walter already told you that. You can go upstairs, pack your things, and walk out through those gates tomorrow morning, and no one in this house is permitted to stop you. I've made that clear to all of them. Selina looked at him. Then why are you standing here telling me this? Because I want you to understand what you're choosing, Declan said, and something in his voice changed. If you stay, I need you to understand that you're choosing to stand within the blast radius. You're no longer trapped here. You'll be here because you want to be. And this world won't become gentler simply because you're in it. The men outside this room haven't become kinder just because they're afraid of you. He looked directly into her eyes. Neither have I. Don't mistake the past few weeks for something they aren't. I'm still the man who stood in my own kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning and washed his hands in your sink. It will happen again. Perhaps it won't be because of you. And perhaps next time, you won't believe it was justified. Selina Kovac listened to every word. She thought about the empty apartment in New Haven she could rent beginning the following month. She thought about the letter bearing the red and white Sacred Heart logo that Fiona had pushed across the table. She thought about the 2-hour drive from Amherst that she would never have to make. Then she lowered her head, picked up the rag from the rug, turned back toward the fireplace, and continued polishing the brass fender until it gleamed beneath the lights. She said nothing. Declan Halloran watched her for a long time. Then he picked up his coat and walked out, leaving the untouched glass of liquor on the cabinet. The woman was leaning against the door of Selina's own car when she came out of Meadowbrook the following Saturday afternoon. She appeared to be around 40, with dark blonde hair cut to her shoulders and a gray wool coat. She wasn't blocking the way, but stood slightly to one side, her hands in plain sight, at just enough of a distance for Selina to walk straight to the car door if she wished. Miss Kovac, the woman said. I'm Ruth Odegaard, Federal Bureau of Investigation, New Haven office. She took out her wallet, opened it, held it up just long enough, then folded it shut again. I don't have a warrant, and you aren't required to speak with me. If you get into your car and drive away, there won't be any consequences. Selina stood motionless between the 2 rows of cars. I have nothing to say, she said. I know, Odegaard replied. I didn't come to ask questions. I came to show you something. There's a diner across the street. I'll be sitting there for 40 minutes. She didn't wait for an answer. She merely nodded and walked toward the gate. Selina stood beside her car for nearly 2 minutes. Then she followed. The diner was almost empty. Odegaard sat at the last table beside the window. She had already ordered 2 cups of coffee, and a brown file folder lay on the table. She didn't slide it across immediately. I'll tell you one thing first so you don't waste your time, Odegaard said. I'm not interested in you. You aren't a target, and your name doesn't appear in any of our files except for one line identifying you as a member of the household staff. I read about what happened to you last month, and I'm sorry it happened. She took a sip. But I'm also not going to pretend I came because I'm concerned about you. I came because of my job. She opened the folder. The first page was a grainy black and white photograph taken from a distance. A harbor at night, shipping containers stacked high, and 3 men standing beside a truck. The man in the middle was Declan Halloran, wearing a long coat and bending his head over a stack of papers. Bridgeport Harbor, September, Odegaard said. We have 4 or 5 photographs like this. I'm not showing them to shock you. I'm showing them so you'll understand that we aren't fumbling around in the dark. She turned to the second page. A printed list of roughly 20 lines, each containing the name of a company along with its Connecticut or Delaware registration number. Selina skimmed it and didn't recognize a single name. These are pass-through entities, Odegaard said. An industrial cleaning company, a medical equipment rental company, 3 consulting firms with no actual offices. Money comes in from the harbor, passes through these companies, then comes out clean. It's a common model. There's nothing inventive about it. She turned to the third page, placed one finger on a line near the bottom, and rotated the paper toward Selina. And this is why I'm sitting in front of you. Selina looked down. It was a table of bank transfers. On the left was the name of one of the companies from the previous list. On the right, beneath the beneficiary column, were the 4 words she had seen at the top of every invoice for the past 4 years. Meadowbrook Care Center. Her face went cold. Over the past 22 months, Odegaard said, this facility has received 9 payments from one of those entities. I want to make something clear immediately, so there's no misunderstanding. Meadowbrook hasn't done anything wrong. It's an independent facility. It isn't owned by anyone connected to this organization, and its board of directors almost certainly knows nothing about this. It happens every day. When someone pays for a relative's care, the facility doesn't ask where the money came from. So what? Selena said. Her voice sounded very far away. So when we file charges, Odegaard said, and there was no pleasure in her voice, we'll have to seek an order freezing every account connected to that flow of money. That isn't my choice. It's procedure. Meadowbrook will be on that list. Its assets will be frozen while the court sorts everything out. She let the silence linger. During the first 48 hours, they won't be able to pay their staff, settle their bills with medication suppliers, or purchase oxygen. In practical terms, they'll have to transfer their patients immediately. 41 people. Selena placed both hands on the table because she needed something solid to hold on to. 41 people, Odegaard repeated. One of them is your younger brother. I've read his file, so I know where he'll be sent, because I know which facilities in this state still have beds available. You're threatening me, Selena said. No, Odegaard replied at once, and for the first time, something hardened in her voice. If I were threatening you, I would say I was going to make that happen. I'm telling you it will happen whether you sit here or not, whether you say anything or not, because this case has been active for 4 years, and it will end sometime next year. I don't control that switch. No one does. Then what do you want from me? Odegaard closed the folder. There's a way to separate the funds, she said. If we know precisely which money is dirty, we can apply for a narrower order. The court will listen. Meadowbrook won't be included, and those 41 people will still be sleeping in their own beds on the night we move in. But to do that, I need to know what I'm looking for, and right now, I don't have anyone inside that house. She slid a business card across the table, face down. I won't call you, she said. I won't come to where you live. I won't appear here again. She stood and left money for the coffee beneath her saucer. I know you think I'm cruel, Miss Kovach, but the cruel person is the one who allowed money from Bridgeport Harbor to flow into the place where your brother lies. Not me. Then she walked out, and the diner door closed behind her. Selena sat alone for a very long time. Inside her mind, 2 images overlapped and refused to separate, the golden cursor moving forward 1 letter at a time across the wheelchair screen, and a hand with 3 scraped knuckles holding a pen. The business card still lay face down between the 2 cups of cold coffee. She didn't touch it. She didn't get up and leave, either. She took the business card. She couldn't remember exactly when her hand had reached for it. She only remembered that by the time she reached the parking lot, it was inside her coat pocket, its printed side still facing down. For the next 3 weeks, 2 things ran side by side through her life, and both grew larger with each passing day. The first was the business card, which had now been moved to the drawer of her nightstand, the same drawer that had once held the piece of paper with red lettering in one corner. The second was all those moments at the edges. They began one morning near the end of November, at around 4 o'clock, when she went down to the basement kitchen for water and found the light already on. Declan sat at the head of the steel table with a cup of black coffee and a stack of papers, his shirt wrinkled at the elbows. Without looking up, he pushed the coffee pot toward her and said, "It's still hot." She poured herself a cup and sat at the opposite end of the table, 3 chairs away, and they remained that way for 15 minutes without either of them speaking. The next morning, she went downstairs at the same hour, and he was there again. By the second week, she was automatically taking out 2 cups instead of 1. Neither of them ever mentioned it. Then there was the afternoon when she was walking through the 3rd-floor hallway, after cleaning the attic rooms, and he approached from the opposite direction. He stopped. She stopped too. He raised his hand and brushed a streak of white dust from the shoulder of her uniform with the back of his hand. Twice, very gently. Then lowered his hand and continued walking. Selena remained in that same spot for nearly a minute. She had been 17 the last time anyone had touched her in a way that asked nothing of her. And the silence between them began to change. Before, it had been distance. Now it lingered too long to be called meaningless. Seconds that both of them knew were passing, yet neither was willing to end. It happened on Thursday night in the library. At around 9 o'clock, she was dusting the ledge of a bookshelf, standing on a low stool so she could reach the top row. He came in looking for a book and stood beside the neighboring shelf, and they talked about harmless things, about how Mrs. Thea had begun baking for Thanksgiving, about how the roof of the East Storage building needed new shingles. Then Selena stepped down from the stool, and he instinctively reached out to steady her by the elbow. But when her feet touched the floor, He didn't withdraw his hand. Selina looked up. They were only a hand's breadth apart. She could see the lines around his eyes with perfect clarity, could see the skin that was still slightly darker across the 3 knuckles that had already healed, and she realized she wasn't stepping away. He didn't pull her toward him. That was what she would always remember. He stood still and gave her time. Enough time that her choice not to move away became an answer. Then he lowered his head. The kiss was brief and slow, and it was nothing like anything she had ever imagined from this man. It wasn't possessive. It was almost careful, the kind of care shown by someone holding something he knew could easily break, and Selina heard her own breath catch somewhere in the middle. She raised one hand to his chest, not to push him away, but merely to rest it there, and she felt his heart beating faster than she had expected. When he drew back, he didn't say a word. He only looked at her for a long moment, then tucked a strand of hair that had fallen loose from her bun behind her ear, and that gesture made her eyes burn in a way the kiss hadn't. "Sleep well," he said softly. Then he walked out. Selina stood there until the sound of his footsteps had completely faded at the far end of the hallway. Then she picked up the damp cloth, turned off the light, pushed her supply cart outside, and made it exactly 4 steps before she had to stop and lean her shoulder against the wall. Only one wall lamp remained lit at the far end of the dark hallway. She slipped a hand into her apron pocket. The USB drive was there, a piece of black plastic about 1.5 inches long, without a label, which she had bought for $9 at the grocery store near the bus station on Tuesday. She had carried it in her pocket for 9 days. She hadn't connected it to any computer. She had merely carried it with her during every shift. And each time her hand touched it, she told herself that she hadn't decided anything yet, that carrying something in her pocket wasn't the same as doing something. But she stood in that dark hallway with her lips still warm and her fingers closing tightly around that small piece of plastic, and she could no longer lie to herself. No one carried something for 9 days if they hadn't already decided. She thought of the 41 names on a list she had never read. She thought of the golden cursor moving forward 1 letter at a time across the screen attached to the wheelchair frame. She thought of the man who had kissed her less than 2 minutes earlier, the man who had knelt on the floor to tell her brother the truth, the man who had structured a trust so she could leave whenever she wished, and she understood that she was about to use the very freedom he had given her to do the one thing he would never forgive. Selina stood alone in the dark hallway for a very long time. Then she pushed the cart toward the service stairs, her right hand still inside her apron pocket, gripping the USB drive tightly. She did it at noon on a Tuesday while cleaning the accounting office on the 2nd floor, after Walter Price had gone to lunch. She didn't know what she was looking for. She inserted the USB drive into the computer, copied the 3 folders with the most ordinary names, removed it, and moved on to the next room in less than 4 minutes. 3 days later, she placed it on the table of the diner across the road from Meadowbrook. Odegaard didn't thank her. She merely slipped it into her coat pocket and said, "You understand that I can't promise you anything, don't you?" Selina nodded. 9 days later, Odegaard called. It was the only time she ever called. "There's nothing there," she said. Selina stood frozen inside the telephone booth at the gas station. "What does that mean?" "It means everything on it is clean," Odegaard said. "Cleaning contracts, contractor invoices, payroll records, property taxes. Not a single line matches anything on our list. If I brought this into court, the defense would thank me." Selina rested her forehead against the glass. "Then that's the end of it." "No," Odegaard said, and her voice changed. "There's something else. Because I had to cross-check everything to make sure. I ran a comparison against every document we've collected on this organization over the past 4 years. And there's a gap. 3 times in the past 18 months, we received inside information from a source who isn't ours." Selina didn't understand. "What does that mean?" she asked again. "It means someone inside that house has been passing information to the outside," Odegaard said. "It's been happening for 18 months. That person hasn't spoken to us. Not once. We know only because we've stumbled across things no one outside that house should have known." She paused. "Miss Kovac, you aren't the only person leaking information from that house. You're merely the only one doing it for the government." Selina returned to Rothbury Hill at 9 o'clock that night, and she didn't go up to her room. She went straight to the basement storage room, sat down on a wooden crate, and began thinking in a way she hadn't allowed herself to think for the past 2 months. Who? Not the soldiers. They didn't have access to anything valuable. Not Walter Price. He never left his desk. The drivers, the guards, the kitchen staff, none of them were allowed on the 3rd floor. Then she thought about the trash bags. Selena Kovac had emptied the trash from the entire third floor every night, 7 nights a week, for 2 years and 2 months. She knew every wastebasket in that hallway. She knew Mr. Price threw his used tea bags into the basket to the left of his desk and never put paper in it. She knew Declan's office used the same thin gray plastic bags as the rest of the house, and that every document inside had already been fed through the shredder beside the window, leaving long, slender strips of paper like noodles. And she knew Fiona Halloran's office was different. Not once in 2 years had Selena been allowed to touch the trash from that room. The bag was always left outside the door, already sealed with a double knot, and it was always made of thicker black plastic, the kind the supply room didn't issue to the third floor. She had asked the housekeeper about it during her first year. The woman had told her not to ask questions, that lawyers had their own rules about documents, and Selena had nodded and never asked again. Because that was what a girl who scrubbed floors learned on her first day. People didn't see the person who emptied the trash. They passed her in the hallway, talked on the telephone right in front of her, and left documents spread open on their desks while she cleaned. She wasn't a person. She was part of the cleaning process. And that was precisely why the person who emptied the trash saw everything. On Thursday night, Selena waited until 11 o'clock. She went up to the third floor, and the thick black bag was lying in its usual place outside Fiona's office, sealed with a double knot. She carried it down to the basement. She didn't open it in the storage room. She took it into the laundry room, locked the door, spread a white towel across the folding table, and cut the tie with a pair of scissors. The bag was filled with shredded paper, but it wasn't like the shredded paper from Declan's office. Fiona's machine cut in both directions, reducing the pages to tiny diamond-shaped pieces about the size of the tip of Selena's little finger, the kind of shredding considered highly secure. Selena stared at the pile of paper for nearly a minute. Then she began. It took her 4 hours. She worked the way someone might sort medicine into a tray, separating the pieces by ink color, paper thickness, and cut edges. Most of them were meaningless, fragments containing only 2 or 3 letters. But near the bottom of the bag, she found a group of pieces that were entirely different. The paper was thicker and textured, the kind used for official documents, and several fragments bore traces of color, a deep shade of blue she had never seen anywhere in that house. She fitted them together on the white towel with clear tape, piece by piece, while 2 of her fingers trembled with exhaustion. By nearly 4 o'clock in the morning, she had reconstructed about 1/3 of a page. The top portion, in the upper left corner, was a blue hexagonal logo, and beneath it was the name of a company printed in a plain typeface. Selena had never seen that name at Rothbury Hill. She had never heard anyone mention it, but she had seen it before, exactly once, printed on a sheet of paper that had been pushed across a table in a diner in Milford, on the 11th line of a list of intermediary companies. Except that on the list, this company didn't belong to the Halloran organization. It appeared in the adjoining column, beneath another name, Elliot Vasher. Selena sat down on the tiled floor of the laundry room, rested her back against the dryer, and stared at that patched-together sheet of paper until daylight came. She went up to the third floor the following night at 10 o'clock, carrying the patched sheet of paper folded into quarters inside her apron pocket. The office door was already open. Declan sat behind his desk with the desk lamp glowing, and lying face down before him was a small printed photograph. He didn't look up when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. Then he turned the photograph over and pushed it into the center of the desk. Selena looked down. The picture had been taken from across the street, through a windshield, its edges slightly blurred. There were 2 women inside the car. The woman in the driver's seat was Ruth Odegaard. The woman beside her was Selena. "Sit down," Declan said, "and choose your next words, very carefully." Selena pulled out the chair and sat. Her hands rested in her lap, and she was surprised to find that they weren't trembling. "I met her 3 times, she said. "The first time was in the Meadowbrook parking lot. The second was at the diner across the street. The third time, I gave her a USB drive. A very brief silence followed. Declan's face revealed nothing. "Go on," he said. "I copied 3 folders from Mr. Price's computer," she said. "I didn't know what I was taking. She called last week. There was nothing in them. Everything was clean." "Why?" Declan asked. "Just one word." "Because Meadowbrook is on their list," Selena said. "Over the past 22 months, 9 payments from one of your intermediary companies have gone there. The facility knows nothing about it, but when the federal government files charges, they'll have to seek an order freezing every account connected to the money, and Meadowbrook will be frozen. During the first 48 hours, they won't be able to buy medication or pay the nurses. 41 people will be transferred. Her voice remained steady. She said that if they knew exactly which flow of money was dirty, they could seek a narrower order and leave the facility off the list. I believed her. I still do. Selina looked directly into his eyes. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it so those 41 people wouldn't be thrown out into the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. If you want to fire me, I understand. Declan remained still for a very long time. Then he pulled the photograph back toward himself, folded it in half, and set it aside. Are you finished? He asked. No, Selina replied. She took out the sheet of paper and placed it on the desk. This is the real reason I came up here tonight. Declan unfolded it. It was a piece of thick paper, only about 1/3 of a page remaining, reconstructed from more than 40 tiny diamond-shaped fragments held together by overlapping strips of tape. He studied it for 3 seconds, then looked up. Where did this come from? The trash bag outside Fiona's office, Selina said. Thursday night. Don't, Declan said. For 2 years and 2 months, I've emptied the trash on the 3rd floor every night, she continued, speaking faster because she knew he was about to cut her off. Every room on that floor uses the standard gray bags from the supply room. Only that office always uses thick black bags. They're always left outside the door, already sealed with a double knot, and not once in 2 years have I been allowed to touch one while it was still open. I asked the housekeeper about it once, and she told me not to ask questions. Lawyers have their own rules about documents, Declan said. Yes, Selina replied. That's what I believed for 2 years. Then she spoke the words she had thought of in the laundry room at 4 o'clock in the morning. No one sees the person who empties the trash, sir. That's why the person who empties the trash sees everything. Declan didn't answer. He pulled the paper closer, turned it beneath the light of the desk lamp, and began reading the top of the page. Selina saw the precise instant when he stopped. His eyes no longer moved. They fixed on the blue hexagonal logo in the upper left corner, and for nearly 4 seconds, the man behind that desk didn't breathe. You know this, Selina said. Declan lowered the paper very slowly, as though he were afraid of tearing it. This belongs to Elliot Vasher, he said. Who? A man in New Haven, he replied, and every trace of emotion had vanished from his voice. He owns a chain of pharmacies and 3 pharmaceutical distribution companies. We don't do business together. We never have. He looked up, and Selina saw something on his face that she had never seen before. Not even in the basement kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning. No document belonging to that man is permitted to exist inside this house, he said. At that exact moment, the telephone in Selina's apron pocket vibrated. She pulled it out by instinct. It was 11:40 at night. The number on the screen wasn't one she had saved. It was Meadowbrook's main switchboard number, the same sequence of digits she had seen on every invoice for 4 years. She answered. The woman's voice on the other end was trembling and speaking so quickly that Selina had to ask her to repeat herself twice. Miss Kovash, a man came to the front desk at 9 o'clock. He had identification. He signed the visitor log and said he was Benedict's uncle. Selina shot to her feet. My parents didn't have any brothers or sisters. On either side. Not one. We've just checked his room, the woman said. The boy isn't there. Inside the house, everything began moving at once. Footsteps pounded along the main staircase, and car engines roared to life in the courtyard. Selina sat in a chair inside the 3rd-floor study and took no part in any of it. She was thinking. Declan turned back toward her. Tell me, he said. Benny uses injectable baclofen, Selina said. The intravenous kind, not pills. He can't swallow pills. The medication has to be kept between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has to be administered every 8 hours, exactly on time. She looked at the clock on the wall. His last dose was at 6 o'clock this evening. The next one has to be given at 2 o'clock in the morning. If he misses it? Declan asked. She heard how calm her own voice sounded and couldn't understand why. If it stopped suddenly, the muscle spasms rebound. During the first 4 hours, there'll be fever and a racing heart. After that, his entire body will seize. She swallowed. If whoever took him wants to keep him alive, they'll need to have that medication in their hands before 2 o'clock in the morning. Declan picked up his telephone. No, Selina said, rising to her feet. It isn't an ordinary medication. It's a special formulation made for an infusion pump. Retail pharmacies don't stock it. I've been collecting my brother's medication for 4 years, and I know exactly where it can be found. Within 60 miles of Milford, Only 4 places keep it in stock. One is the Yale New Haven Hospital Pharmacy. The other 3 are specialty pharmacies. She raised her eyes. You said that other man owns a chain of pharmacies. Declan looked at her. Then he spoke into the telephone, called someone by name, and ordered him to find every facility registered to Vasher in New Haven County, including those no longer operating. 40 minutes later, they had a list. 3 operating pharmacies, 1 distribution center, and a refrigerated pharmaceutical warehouse in the industrial district south of New Haven that had been closed for 2 years, but still had an active 3-phase electrical contract in the company's name. Selina pointed to the final line. This one. Why? Because the other 3 have employees, cameras, and controlled medication logs. This place has industrial refrigerators that still have power, and no one around. They left at 1:15 in the morning, 2 vehicles. Selina sat in the back seat of the second one, and no one told her to stay behind because no one was brave enough to try. The industrial district lay at the end of an unlit road, bordered on both sides by steel fences and weeds rising as high as a person's waist. The vehicles stopped about 55 yards from the warehouse and turned off their lights. Declan opened the door, then turned back. Stay in the vehicle, he said. If you come outside, I'll have to assign someone to watch you, and that'll be 1 less person searching for your brother. She nodded. He closed the door. Then she sat there alone in the darkness and began to listen. At first, there was a long silence, broken only by the wind moving through the weeds. Then came a low sound from inside the concrete structure, like a heavy metal door being forced along its track. Then silence again, then 3 muted explosions. Nothing like the sharp cracks in the movies, but dull and heavy, traveling through the concrete walls and reaching her like the sound of someone driving 3 stakes deep into the earth. Selina bent forward, wrapping both hands around her head. Then came the high, drawn-out sound of breaking glass, dragging on for several seconds before dying away. Then silence. She raised her head and stared at the dark structure before her, but nothing else happened. No shouting, no footsteps, nothing at all. She counted. She counted to 60, then began again, and she reached the end a second time. And those 2 minutes felt longer than the past 4 years of her life combined. Then the front door of the vehicle opened, and the driver spoke 2 words into his radio before turning toward her. It's over. Get out. Selina threw herself from the vehicle and ran. The side door of the warehouse stood wide open. It was cold and dark inside, and the air smelled of concrete dust. The only light came from 3 flashlights sweeping back and forth through the darkness. She heard Declan's voice before she saw him, and he was calling someone's name, calling it over and over, and it wasn't hers. Fiona. Selina ran toward the sound. In the middle of the empty floor, beneath the flashlight beams of 3 men kneeling around her, a woman in a charcoal suit lay on her side upon the concrete. About 7 feet away stood a wheelchair. Fiona Halloran had stepped between them. Declan knelt beside his sister, both hands pressed hard against her side, telling her to open her eyes. Selina stood rooted to the spot for exactly 1.5 seconds. Then she turned toward the wheelchair and ran. Benny was in the cold room at the back, seated in a spare wheelchair without a headrest, and she could see what was happening to him from nearly 16 feet away. His body was arched backward, his shoulders jerking up toward his ears, both hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His skin was hot. His pulse was fast and thready. Selina dropped to her knees in front of him and said, "I'm here. Look at me, Benny. Look at me." Then she turned and shouted toward the door. "The refrigerator. The one with the lock. Open it." One of the men smashed the lock and pulled out a plastic tray. Inside were 6 vials with their seals still intact. Someone had prepared them in advance. Selina tore open a syringe package with her teeth, checked the name of the medication, checked the concentration, checked the expiration date, tapped the top of the vial twice, and drew the dose. She hadn't done this in 4 years. Her hands didn't tremble once. She disinfected the injection site, counted 3 beats, administered the medication slowly and steadily, then placed both hands on the boy's shoulders and kept them there. 7 minutes later, the muscles in Benny's shoulders began to loosen. In the outer room, Declan was still kneeling on the concrete floor, both hands pressed hard against his sister's left side. Fiona opened her eyes. "Don't," she said. "Don't say anything. Listen to me." "Be quiet," Declan said. "The ambulance is coming." 6 years ago, Fiona said, "when I handled Mother's estate. There was a box of documents in the storage building in Newport. Mother kept it." She drew in a breath, and the sound of it wasn't right. "It wasn't an outsider who killed Dad," she said. "It was Uncle Desmond." Declan didn't move. His hands remained pressed against the same place. "I have half of it," Fiona continued. "The other half was in the old files of a man who once worked for him, and that man sold it to Vasher a long time ago. I've been talking to Vasher for the past 18 months to get it back. I gave him information. Things I thought were harmless." She closed her eyes. "I was wrong." "Why didn't you tell me?" Declan asked. "Because I saw you at 17 in that funeral home," Fiona replied, "and I thought that if you knew he'd been standing in the front row that day, you would destroy yourself. I carried it for 6 years so you wouldn't have to." Tears ran across her temples and fell onto the concrete floor. "I didn't betray you. I simply didn't trust that you were strong enough to hear the truth. That was my mistake." Sirens wailed at the far end of the unlit road. Fiona Halloran survived. The surgery at Yale New Haven lasted 5 hours. She lost part of her spleen, and the state bar opened a disciplinary investigation whose outcome everyone could already predict. But she survived. 3 days later, Declan called Special Agent Ruth Odegaard. He didn't go through an attorney. He didn't negotiate. He gave her everything Fiona had collected on Elliot Vasher, and it wasn't about money laundering. It was a file on 3 batches of counterfeit painkillers brought in through distribution channels controlled by Vasher, on 31 people who had died across 4 counties over 2.5 years, and on 2 doctors who had signed prescriptions for drugs they knew weren't what they claimed to be. Odegaard reached the 4th page, then looked up and asked him what he wanted. "Nothing," Declan said. She didn't believe him. But she took the file. Selina asked him about it the following night in the basement kitchen, over 2 cups of coffee. "You could have dealt with him another way," she said. "Yes," he replied. 40 seconds. Then 3 months later, someone starts asking questions. He turned the cup slowly in his hand. "A body creates an investigation. A conviction creates a precedent. I've told you that before. 31 families will see his name in the newspaper, and they'll know why their loved ones died. I can't take that away from them." "What about your uncle?" Selina asked. Declan didn't answer that night. He went to Newport the following Saturday, alone. Desmond Halloran was 71 years old. He lived in a retirement community overlooking the bay, played cards 3 times a week, read both newspapers every morning, and remained entirely lucid. He was sitting on the veranda when Declan arrived, and he invited him to sit down. Declan didn't sit. He stood there for nearly 40 seconds without saying a word, until the old man understood and lowered the newspaper. "You know," Desmond said. It wasn't a question. Declan looked at the man who had held him in his arms at the funeral home 20 years earlier. "You live," he said. "Nothing happens to you. You keep this apartment. You keep your money. You keep your Thursday card game." He paused. "But you live knowing that I know. And from this day forward, no one will ever call you again. Not me, not Fiona, not anyone who has ever worked for this family." Then he turned away. The old man called his name twice behind him. Declan didn't look back. At Meadowbrook that night, after everything had grown quiet, and Selina sat beside the bed beneath the soft glow of the reading lamp, the screen mounted on the wheelchair frame lit up. The golden cursor began to move. She watched it travel through all 3 letters, slowly and steadily, and the machine's voice spoke one flat word into the silent room. "Sis." The question was asked on a February morning in the basement kitchen, over 2 cups of coffee. On the table lay the draft plea agreement the federal prosecutor had sent through his new attorney. It ran 40 pages, and Declan had read it 3 times without picking up a pen. Selina didn't advise him to sign it. She asked him only one question. "Benny will grow up," she said, "and one day, he'll search for your name online. What do you want him to find?" Declan Halloran sat in silence for a very long time. Then he picked up the pen. The agreement was made public in April. He pleaded guilty to 2 financial counts, accepted 5 years of federal probation, and surrendered most of his assets under a forfeiture order. The provision, whose full meaning no one outside the courtroom understood, appeared on page 31. It transferred the entire chain of rehabilitation clinics into a non-profit entity that would remain under court supervision for 10 years and be governed by an independent board. Special Agent Ruth Odegaard sat in the back row and spoke to no one as she left the courthouse. 11 months after the night in New Haven, Selina Kovac stood beside the industrial sink in the basement kitchen at Rothbury Hill and washed her hands beneath the warm running water. She no longer wore the gray uniform. It had been folded and placed inside a cabinet at the beginning of summer. She was completing the final semester of her bachelor's degree in nursing at Sacred Heart, paying her own tuition with the salary she earned as operations manager for the nonprofit foundation, and she still cooked dinner for the three of them because doing so brought her peace. The water flowed down the drain, clear and colorless. The door opened. Declan stepped inside with rain still clinging to the shoulders of his coat, set his car keys on the steel counter, and didn't lock the door behind him. The east wing had been fully renovated in September. The thresholds had been lowered, the passageways widened, and a ceiling track installed in the bathroom. Benny lived there with a nurse on duty during the day, attended an online high school program, and argued with Declan about Civil War history nearly every evening. That night, the boy called him into his room. The golden cursor began inching across the screen, mounted on the wheelchair frame. It moved very slowly, and Declan Halloran stood there for 4.5 minutes without moving, without guessing ahead, without speaking a single word for him. When the machine finally read the sentence aloud, its voice was as flat as ever. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Declan couldn't answer. He merely nodded once, exactly as he had nodded at Meadowbrook more than a year earlier, then walked into the hallway and stood there in the darkness for a long time. Late that night, he went down to the kitchen. Selina was wiping the steel counter. He placed a small key in front of her, attached to a plastic tag bearing an apartment number. "What is this?" she asked. "An apartment in New Haven," he said. "A 10-minute walk from your school. It's paid for a year. It's in your name, and mine doesn't appear on a single line." He rested his hand on the counter. "This is a way out. I'm not giving it to you so you'll leave. I'm giving it to you so you can hold it in your hand and know it's real." Selina stared at the key for a long time. She thought of the envelope of cash she had once received every Friday and had never kept for herself. She thought of the 2 years she had spent walking through these hallways with her head lowered. Then she picked up the key, felt its weight in her hand, and set it back down on the steel counter between them. "I know it's real," she said. "That's why I'm staying." Outside, the January rain tapped against the tall panes of glass. Selina walked to the heavy wooden door of the basement kitchen, the same door a man had locked at 3:12 in the morning nearly 2 years earlier, and raised her hand to the bolt. This time, she turned it herself. From the inside, with him standing on the same side, Selina Kovac's story isn't the story of a woman rescued by a powerful man. It's the story of what happens when a human being who has been treated as invisible is finally seen. For 2 years, she scrubbed floors and emptied trash, and no one in that house could remember her name. And that was precisely why she saw the truth no one else could see. No one notices the person who takes out the trash. That's why the person who takes out the trash sees everything. The lesson is simple, but it isn't easy to live by. Remember the name of the person who cleans your office. Greet the cashier, the delivery driver, and the person mopping the hospital hallway at 3 o'clock in the morning, because a person's dignity isn't measured by the title on an employee badge, and the person standing lowest in a room is often the one who understands that room best. This story also reminds us that silence never protects anyone. Selina remained silent for 4 years because she was afraid of losing her job, and that silence only made the person responsible more powerful. Fiona remained silent for 6 years because she believed she was protecting her brother, and that silence nearly destroyed their entire family. Speaking the truth is frightening, but keeping it buried inside costs far more. And in the end, true love is never a pair of handcuffs. It's a key. The person who truly loves you will always leave the door open, so you can stay because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to go. If you've listened this far, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video so we can continue listening to more compelling stories together every day. How did this story make you feel? And is there someone in your life whom others have treated as invisible? Please leave a comment below. We truly hope to hear the feelings that come from the deepest place in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health and a life filled with happiness and peace each day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.